Um, the thing is, firstly, the way some of these frontiersmen in science are putting it, is that a child, when a baby is born, it knows, it perceives what is in front of it, and when that is no longer there, it doesn't think it's there anymore. A baby can be quite distressed when its mother disappears. It's only after a little while that it starts to realize that even when she's no longer there, it doesn't mean she doesn't exist any longer. And what some of the scientists are telling us is that comes at the point where you start getting lost in the game. In other words, the baby is more in a state of reality in judging that what is real is what is being observed at that point. In other words, that it's an observation that is real rather than the material world. This is a tricky one to get into one's head, but that's firstly what they're indicating. This comes up that the child, before it has become so engaged in the game, realizes that its own consciousness is creating its reality moment by moment, second by second. In a sense, there is no external reality to that child, in a sense. The game has rules, as I was indicating. There is a fixed lifespan for these 50, 75 trillion cells that make up my body. They can divide only so many times. Definitely, there's an understanding that when you manage yourself better, so that you're no longer putting these cells under so much pressure, like so many of us do when we're chronically distressed by life and the stresses of life, then remove those stresses, you'll live longer. But still, there's going to be a limit to it. So I wouldn't go along with some of Deepak Chopra's claims about the mind being able to do anything. However, he's right in pointing to there being much more potential in our minds than we realize. And just to give you one little story connected with that, apart from Anita Moorjani's brilliant account of her total recovery in 6 weeks from a cancer that had been killing her for 4 years, the phenomenon of the stigmata, I think it's a wonderful demonstration that certain people with deep Christians with a deep love for God, it's sometimes been nuns and others, they identify with Christ. They can go into a trance-like state in which they identify with Christ and his suffering on the cross so much that they develop holes in their hands and feet, and blood can even come from the forehead. And when they come out of the trance, there's instant healing. So it's as if the power of their consciousness to shift matter is so intense in that trance-like state that the illusion of solid matter is briefly transcended, such that this change can happen. It's a little clue, a little pointer to the idea that really our minds are much more powerful than we generally allow ourselves to realize. And I think that therein lies a really happy and powerful life. If there can be an alignment between the blueprint of our own perfection, which exists, that in the mind of nature or in the mind of God, an alignment between that blueprint, that perfect image of what our consciousness can be when we are love and joy and peace, an alignment between that and the soul and the mind, which sort of sits between the soul and the brain and the body. When those become aligned, you have a wonderful life. But the problem for many of us is that we've been so caught in the material realm and the conditioning in our brains arising from our over-concern with the material side and our neglect of those deeper dimensions, that conflicts come up, and that's the root of a lot of our peacelessness and stress. But that alignment that I think you are pointing to will actually produce a great life, a life of flow, a life of beauty, a life of ease. And I think that's a great goal for any of us to move towards. It seemed as if time and distance didn't exist. I was everywhere at once, and sometimes my attention was focused on something and I was there too. People say that they have this sense of connection to the whole, but they're still aware of themselves as a kind of individuated consciousness, and they just have to have a sort of sense of connecting to a long-lost relative, for example, and they connect with them. It's as if that relative really is there, and sometimes the relative is involved in sending them back. I like this one. I think death is a really nasty, bad lie. That came from the heart from this person. You know, they knew, there's their body, and then they've gone off into this light, and they're so conscious, they're super conscious, if you like, so they see death as being a big myth. Next slide, please. So Pim van Lommel says that we can all actually, it's a natural thing for us to connect to that realm beyond. And I now believe that the meditation that I learned with the spiritual training group, the Brahma Kumaris, that I came into contact with all those years ago, I now believe that actually what we're doing with that meditation is just this. We're putting ourselves into a still frame of mind where we quieten our connection with the brain so that we can go beyond and feel the nourishment without actually dying of this realm beyond. I think that's what it's all about. There are many of the great founders of the great faith traditions, you know, Jesus Christ, Buddha, Abraham, Muhammad, they all spoke of living in ways that help you to live lightly here, not to covet things, not to cause hurt, but to be simple and, as much as possible, do what you have to do here, but keep coming into that place of stillness so that you don't cut yourself off from that dimension entirely, like I feel our harem-scarum world of today has put us at risk of doing. So he says, well, okay, next slide. Now there's one or two more examples of this phenomenon. Eben Alexander, a neurosurgeon, solid materialistic outlook. He fixes brains, people are better. He gets an infection of his frontal cortex, puts him in a coma for a week. They think they've lost him, he comes back, he desperately wants to write about his experience. It's very much like a near-death experience. Here's a couple of quotes from his book, Proof of Heaven. I was encountering the reality of a world of consciousness that existed completely free of the limitations of my physical brain. You get the idea, you know, it's like here we're focused, there you're in the projection room, whatever metaphor we use. My experience showed me that the death of the body and the brain are not the end of consciousness. Next slide, please. Similar story from Jill Bolte Taylor, a brain scientist in the States. She's written it up in a book, My Stroke of Insight. There's a great TED talk on YouTube, you can look her up, 20-minute beautiful description, great passion about the experience and how it changed her. This is a very common factor, by the way, when Pim van Lommel's study followed the near-death experience people up for years, and he found they made permanent changes in their lives because they could not live in the way that, the materialistic way that had caused them to have that premature heart attack or whatever it was. They just knew that they had to live more in line with the beauty of the inner being that they experienced when they were beyond. So Jill Bolte Taylor, she had a hemorrhage in her left hemisphere, gradually shut it down. It was a nightmare for her at first, as all her faculties went, but then she went into this realm of bliss and connectedness, and a quote from her was that, I am the life force power of the universe. I am the life force power of the 50 trillion beautiful molecular geniuses that make up my form, at one with all that is. It's like the Force, you know, in Star Wars. And I've got a quote to come from one of the founders of quantum theory, very much on those lines. She means the 50 trillion cells that make up the body. Next slide, please. One more beautiful example, Anita Moorjani. She got cancer of the lymph glands, and her book, Dying to Be Me, became an international bestseller. Again, she's on the talk circuit, wanting everyone to know about the power of what lies beyond when we connect our consciousness to that deeper realm and bring that to the mind and through into our everyday lives. It's so transformational. 4 years she suffered from lymphoma. The lymph glands grew and grew. She was pushed into a coma by it. They thought she'd gone. And she had actually gone, although she didn't stop breathing and the heart beating. But in the coma, she experienced this realm of love, and she realized very deeply she actually connected with her long-lost father. And he told her to come back, but what really made the transformation in her was this sense that you must understand how important love is to the self, to others, to life. One of the reasons I got cancer, she said, is that I didn't love myself. When we love ourselves, we value ourselves. When we value ourselves, we teach people how to treat us, which is really significant. When you don't value yourself because you're disconnected, if you like, from the beauty of the inner being, you're not assertive with others. You let them trample on you. You let them put you down. When you value yourself because of knowing the true self, you don't allow people to do that, nor do you don't feel a need to control or bully others, nor do you allow other people to control or bully you. So next slide. This is a beautiful quote from A Return to Love, a book written about 20 years ago by Marianne Williamson, and I think I was given it at the time. I found it in my library recently, but I didn't really get the message at the time. She's really good on this. She says, the perfect you is the love within you. Closing our hearts destroys our peace. You know, when you put a kind of shield around your heart, it may not be your fault. You know, there might be many assaults that life gives to your heart, and so you kind of protect it with an iron guard, or it becomes scarred so that there's a certain element of unfeelingness about the way that we approach life. But to the extent that we act with that lack of feeling, we hurt ourselves as well, and we create peacelessness and stress. Because our true nature is loving and peaceful. So when we don't act in accordance with that, automatically we will feel distressed because we're going against our true nature. Closing our hearts destroys our peace. It's alien to our nature. Marianne Williamson has a very nice way of putting this. Don't know if you could quite catch it. It's very essential. She says, thought is cause, meaning that what comes from the mind, thought stroke feeling, if you like. Thought is cause. What comes from the mind comes into experience. Experience is effect. If you're not happy with the effects in your life, you have to change the nature of your thinking. Very simple, but very, very deep and interesting and powerful in the light of the new paradigm about the power, the deep power of thought to change your life. So Eben Alexander also says, love is without a doubt. He waxes lyrical in his book Heaven is Real about this, and he was a conventional, a neurosurgeon, wasn't he? Love is without a doubt the basis of everything. And next slide, and one of those near-death experiences, next slide please, said, on return, a single loving thought would let me be part of the whole again. So you can see how once you've reconnected to that realm beyond, that you've opened the doors of perception, even a little, you don't have to die, but if you open those doors of perception and glimpse the beauty of that other realm, then even as you're moving through your everyday life, when you've practiced this for a while, it comes from that side too. When you've practiced this for a while, it's like a knack you develop. You can just have that thought, and you might be in the office with your family, but just a little moment's break and you can take your mind into the beautiful, nourishing, powerful experience of that love. But how much is this aspect that Marianne Williamson was talking about? How could that be that thought is cause, experience is effect, and if you're not happy with the effects in your life, you need to change the nature of your thinking. This really brings home the idea behind the title of this evening's program, My Consciousness, My Reality, because my consciousness is the thought and feeling that I'm living with habitually. And that then becomes my reality out here. Well, we've seen how that can work with the brain, that it can change the nature of the brain. We know from mind-body medicine how persistent negative thoughts have an impact on the heart and the health. And we know that persistent positive and joyful and meaningful thought, feeling, consciousness produces health, well-being. The whole field of epigenetics showing how the DNA actually responds to our thoughts and feelings. So when we flourish mentally and emotionally, the DNA gives us more of what we need in terms of proteins for growth and flourishing. And when we feel crabby and constrained and confused by life, the DNA won't function in the same way and you'll feel exhausted. You are exhausted because you haven't got the energy and the proteins you need for flourishing. The connections are there, but how far do they go? I mean, in one sense, it's obvious that if I get a bit more information about a situation, I will change the way I react to it. Like, I'm driving down the road, somebody cuts me up badly, and might have a tendency to be really annoyed, but then if I knew that he was racing to save his sick child from, on their deathbed, I wouldn't have that same anger. So the information I have definitely affects my consciousness and my reality, but it goes really deep. We don't have time to explore this fully. I just want to give a pointer tonight of how deep it may go. Next slide, please. This is a quote from the father of quantum mechanics, Max Planck. There are Planck institutes all over the world, especially in Germany, where he came from. He was absolute genius in elaborating this new field of science, of quantum theory. And he said at some point that despite a lifetime of studying matter, he'd now understood from the mathematics and the experiments and the clarification of this area, insofar as it went at that time, back in about 1925, 1930, all matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force. We must assume behind this force is the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter. Now that you don't get that in physics classes. You get quantum mechanics and the impact on microprocessors and lasers and so forth, but you don't get this phenomenal paradigm-busting perspective, which has been on offer for all these decades, but was only now with the consciousness-based paradigm, or maybe the new name of post-materialist science, will make it happen. Einstein said something similar. Next slide, please. Everyone who is seriously involved in the pursuit of science becomes convinced that a spirit is manifest in the laws of the universe, a spirit vastly superior to that of man, and one in the face of which we, with our modest powers, must feel humbled. And a third one. Next slide, please. This was Sir James Jeans, a very prominent British mathematician and physicist. He wrote a book called The Mysterious Universe. 1930 it came out. The stream of knowledge is heading towards a non-mechanical reality. The universe begins to look more like a great thought than a great machine. This is paradigm-busting stuff, and it's not easy to grasp. How could the universe be a great thought? Where does that thought lie? Is it in the mind of God? Is it nature's mind? Is there a world mind? Are we parts of it? We know that definitely when you understand the power of thought, you can do a lot with it, but you can't just transform something just by thinking about it. I mean, if you try and pretend that there's a you're on a railway track and there's a train thundering down towards you. You can't think it away just by saying it's a thought. It will knock you down and you'll be out of the game. But nevertheless, there are scientists referred to in that Good News You Are Not Your Brain article by Chopra and Tanzi, who are very much saying that really reality is like a gigantic virtual reality game run by some sort of supermind, and we have to obey the laws within that, just as you might have to in a game of virtual tennis, otherwise you're out of the game. But nevertheless, it is mind-like at its basis. Now, what that means, it remains for the world of science to turn its brilliance and attention so that these frontier scientists are supported by a wider body of knowledge and research. But that's the direction that it's moving in. And next slide, please. The implications of this for us are really huge. Because thought is the creative level of things, changing our minds is the ultimate personal empowerment. And I've seen this, I've practiced this myself in my own little way. Like, say there's somebody that really gets my goat, meaning, that every time I have an encounter with them, I find it really difficult. And probably they're having the same with me. And if I actually practice before I'm encountering that person, I practice having thoughts and feelings of a positive kind. I remove myself from that experience of negativity. I refuse to look at what might be a weakness in them, and instead I focus on their strength, and I have that in my heart when I next see them. The encounter is quite different. That's one example, but it works in many different ways. There was a video came out called The Secret a little while back that claimed, and I don't think this is the right way to use the mind necessarily, but it claimed that if you sort of visualize a $5 million home, a few years down the line it will manifest if you visualize it strongly enough. Well, as I say, maybe that does work like that. I think that they're onto something important, but I think also that because of this deep love that is present in this realm beyond, the love and the peace and the positivity and the oneness, I don't think selfishness would take you that far. You might be able to do a certain amount for yourself, but I think there'll be some sort of rebound. But if you align your mind with like the mind of nature and its benevolence and this love that they all speak of, I think your life can become a really powerful one, much more powerful than most of us realize at the moment, although there are people who live this way. Next slide. So this is why these time-honored practices like prayer, reflection, meditation, why they have, even though science discarded them or disregarded them for so long, why they can be so nourishing and powerfully appealing to the human spirit. They are actually means of managing this powerful mind that is mine, and within which my own consciousness sits within that wider consciousness. And the last slide here, Raja Yoga meditation, you saw some, we call them yogis, those meditators sitting on the stage earlier. This is a particularly lovely form of meditation that I learned, where you turn your thoughts inwards, as was described, and you connect your mind to that realm beyond, and we have an understanding that even beyond that field of beautiful connected thought, there is like a source of all that is highest. And it's touched on by some of the people who have the near-death experience. One of them, she'd gone way beyond the body. She was feeling the bliss of this love and this peace and this joy, and she said, "Is this God?" And the thought came back, "No, this is what happens when God breathes," which I thought was wonderful.